In our previous video, entitled Trust, we highlighted how BBC Scotland had broadcast the same lie on 3 separate editions of Reporting Scotland.
Michael Matheson has told Parliament that it was his teenage sons watching football on his parliamentary iPad that caused the huge data roaming charge. Yesterday he apologised to Parliament and said it was his teenage sons watching football on his parliamentary iPad that had caused the £11,000 bill.
Michael Matheson's children ran up the bill watching football on the Scottish Parliament device.
Broadcasting false claims on BBC Scotland happens a lot more frequently than you'd imagine. In this video, we're going to look at other examples, beginning with some recent falsehoods. The first one involves the reinforced aerated concrete issue. On September 2nd this year, BBC presenter Graham Stewart told listeners to Good Morning Scotland that schools in England and Wales had been closed due to fears over aerated concrete.
Now, the Scottish Government has confirmed 35 schools here contain a type of concrete which could potentially be at risk of collapse. Around 100 schools in England and Wales have been shut because they contain the material known as RAAC.
The claim was entirely false. No Welsh schools had been closed. The claim, though, made it look as if the Scottish Government was the only part of Britain not to have closed schools. On September 7th, following news that the UK government had announced the sudden closure of more schools in England because of aerated concrete, Scottish Government Minister Shirley-Ann Somerville made a statement to the Scottish Parliament. That same evening, BBC Scotland reporter Andrew Kerr gave a summary of the minister's statement.
Now, Sally, the Social Justice Secretary, Shirley-Ann Somerville, hit out at the English Education Secretary for closing schools down south.
Andrew Kerr's claim that Shirley-Ann Somerville had, quote, hit out at the English Education Secretary for closing schools down south, unquote, was completely false. Ms. Somerville had said no such thing. She had, in fact, hit out at the UK government for withholding information from the devolved administrations, but not for closing schools. It wasn't the first time this year that Andrew Kerr had given a less than honest summary of a story on live TV. In July, Kerr had covered the Scottish Government's latest independence paper. The paper pledged that citizens in an independent Scotland would be entitled to a Scottish passport. Kerr told viewers the following.
But of course there has been criticism from within the independence movement itself that we have these plans set out for shiny new red passports, but claims the cart is being put before the horse here, that Humza Yousaf is still lacking a strategy to gain independence. Sarah.
It was nonsense. Nobody in the Yes movement had criticized the plan, much less used the language Kerr claimed. He had made it up. None of these fake claims resulted in apologies or corrections. That wasn't the case in 2018, when former Reporting Scotland presenter Jackie Bird was forced to issue an apology after broadcasting a misrepresentation the previous evening.
Well, now some news just coming into us this evening. Edinburgh Airport has confirmed to BBC Scotland that it is helping police with their inquiries into sexual misconduct claims against Alex Salmond. Police Scotland says its inquiries are continuing and it will not be commenting further. A police investigation into the former First Minister of Scotland was launched in September after the Scottish National Party passed 2 complaints of sexual harassment to the authorities. On last night's Reporting Scotland, we carried the story that Edinburgh Airport is helping police with their inquiries into sexual misconduct claims against Alex Salmond. We also said that a Police Scotland investigation into the former First Minister was launched after the Scottish National Party passed 2 complaints of sexual harassment to the authorities. This part of the story was incorrect. The complaints were made to the Scottish Government, not to the SNP. We apologise for this error.
BBC Scotland no longer issues such corrections. And in May this year, a quite extraordinary falsehood was broadcast on Good Morning Scotland.
6 minutes past 7 the time, and this is Good Morning Scotland. The First Minister stands accused of signalling a screeching handbrake turn on the SNP's manifesto promise to offer free meals for all Scotland's school children. Well, Paul O'Kane is Scottish Labour's social justice spokesperson and joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Gary.
Tough choices need to be made, do you agree?
Look, I think the reality of what we heard from the First Minister yesterday is that just weeks into the job, he's already jettisoning policies that he stood by.
The SNP had not promised free school meals for all of Scotland's school children. Gary Robertson's claim was false. What made it worse was that the Scottish Labour MSP being interviewed used the lie to attack SNP leader Humza Yousaf. There was never any correction or apology broadcast by BBC Scotland. Gary Robertson, like his colleague Andrew Kerr, is no stranger to questionable claims. In November 2016, Robertson told Good Morning Scotland listeners the following.
The Ministry of Defence is to make a significant announcement concerning shipbuilding on the Clyde. Unions believe a number of new warships, Type 26 frigates, will be built at Govan and Scotstoun, helping to safeguard thousands of jobs. The project to construct 8 new ships was promised before the independence referendum.
The broadcast was completely false. The UK government hadn't promised 8 Type 26 frigates. It had promised 13 such frigates. During the COVID pandemic, false claims appeared regularly. One of the most notorious happened in May 2020, when Sarah Smith said Nicola Sturgeon had enjoyed imposing more stringent COVID restrictions on Scotland than were in place in the rest of the UK.
Now, the Scottish Government say that, like all of the UK nations, they base their advice on expert advice that they are given and that it's got nothing to do with politics. But it has been obvious that Nicola Sturgeon has enjoyed the opportunity to set her own lockdown rules and not have to follow what's happening in England or other parts of the UK.
Smith later apologized on Twitter, but no broadcast apology was ever made by the BBC. Smith hit the headlines again later that same year, when she attributed comments to Alex Salmond that the former First Minister had not made. The BBC again refused to broadcast a correction. This time, though, the broadcaster wasn't so lucky.
The broadcast regulator Ofcom has ruled that the BBC made a significant mistake in a story last year about Alex Salmond, the former First Minister of Scotland, which should have been corrected on air. BBC's then Scotland editor, Sarah Smith, said that Mr Salmond had called for his successor, Nicola Sturgeon, to resign when he gave evidence to a parliamentary committee in Edinburgh. Mr Salmond had accused Ms Sturgeon of breaking the ministerial code, but he went on to say it wasn't for him to suggest what the consequences should be. The BBC admitted the error, but Ofcom says it should have made an on-air acknowledgement or correction.
The broadcasting regulator Ofcom says the BBC made a significant mistake in a TV bulletin which was not acknowledged and corrected on air. The breach came in a headline by former Scotland editor Sarah Smith, who was reporting on evidence to a Holyrood committee from Alex Salmond. She incorrectly said he believed Nicola Sturgeon should resign as First Minister. The BBC said it accepted the decision and will reflect on the findings.
By now, you may have noticed a pattern with respect to false claims made by BBC Scotland. They all negatively impact the SNP. Fake news reports that negatively impact unionist parties are essentially unheard of. This is by no means an exhaustive list. False news reports that negatively impact the SNP have been broadcast on BBC Scotland for years. The BBC even claimed that Devo Max was the alternative to independence on the referendum ballot.
Now it seems you are offering, effectively, the voters a chance to vote yes or for Devo Max.
It was a complete lie. The BBC's refusal to broadcast corrections means most folk never realize they have been duped.